Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of Rising Strong. I'm delighted that this month we get to feature Anna Kydd, who is the founder of the Tea Curator. She has a really wonderful life journey, which has made her the very special human being that we have come to know and love over many years of being part of our community. Today, we are going to hear Anna's story, or the parts that she can squeeze into the short amount of time we have together. It's always a bit of a challenge to do that. When she's finished, I've got some questions that I would love to ask. And then for those who are on the live call with us, you will also, if you would like to have a cordial directly with Anna to do that. Anna, are you ready to kick us off?
I am ready. Shall I get going?
Yes, Anna, Kydd, please tell us your story.
Okay. I've had a cough for the past few days, so forgive me if I cough a little bit during the session. So I'm going to talk a wee bit about my childhood and then sort of zoom through after that into the challenges that I've faced in more recent years.
Oh,
So
that's
I
good.
was very lucky to grow up on a farm just outside of Cambridge in the North Island. So I'm one of three girls. I'm the middle child, a 1980s baby. And when I thought back on that time, I reflected on how lucky we were, and we were outside all the time. It was a beef and sheep farm, and there were sort of rolling green hills, and we would play with our Barbies in the creek. We had this huge orchard with like figs and walnuts and almonds and persimmons and plums. We had, chooks that we would feed. I had two ponies in my time on the farm. We used to make bonfires and wrap like potatoes and bananas and tinfoil and cook them on the fire. And my dad, and I would never let my kids do this, but my dad, we had a three-wheeler motorbike, and we used to tie like a plank to the back of it on a rope and hoon around the fields, racing around, my sisters and I. So we had such an amazing time growing up. And my mum, we had as you can when you have lots of land, had a huge section, and she had loads of flowers in the section. And I remember when I was little, I loved going around and collecting them all and making little posies. And it just made me think when I was preparing for this. So my texture, which is what my graphic designer called it, the inspiration for the colors for this came from a flower from the farm. And my neighbor has one. I went and stole it this morning. So that's that flower there. And I've actually never communicated that before to my customers. So I feel like I need to. And also when I taste tea these days, the notes that I can detect the easiest are those from my childhood on farm, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So I think growing up on a farm taught me a lot of things. I feel like I'm a really good problem solver. And on a farm, you have to be quite resourceful because there's so many issues that you face on a daily basis. I'm quite careful with my money. And I think, again, cash flow on a farm is all over the place. And so my parents were very careful, and I learned to be careful with money. Absolutely have a strong work ethic from my mum and dad, but also gained an appreciation of community and the importance of community, because in a farming community, people kind of come in and muck in when you need them. We always had people dropping in for a cup of tea when we grew up on the farm. And I think also I feel like I'm quite an adventurous, courageous person. And I think that flourished for me on the farm. I feel like I get that from my dad, sort of genetically. But I remember one day he dared or challenged my younger sister, Belinda, and I to swim across the pond. And I think the prize was a bar of chocolate. And I did that. I can't actually remember if Belinda finished it or not. And then I got out and I was wet, and I stood on an electric fence wire. Yeah, so you can imagine the impact of that. So that was my childhood on the farm. We absolutely loved it. Didn't love it so much in 10 years. All I wanted to do was be in the city hanging out with my friends. Went to university in Wellington, to Victoria University. That's actually where I met Andy, who I later married. We weren't together at that time. We were just friends. And then moved up to Auckland, started to work. So I did a commerce degree. And started to work I first worked at the Port of Wellington in Wellington, and then IAG moved up to Auckland with IAG and that state and NZI insurance and AMI and a few other brands now. And Andy started to work for IAG in Wellington. So we, got to know each other again. He'd been overseas and started to date during that time. Anyway, we decided to move overseas beginning of 2008, and I couldn't wait to do that. When I was young, Mum and Dad had this huge atlas. It was like it was sort of black and white, but it was like purple and red, and it just had maps in it. And I used to read the atlas all the time, thinking I can't wait to go to all of these countries. So we lived in London for a couple of years, and just as you do, we traveled the world. We traveled through food. And we had such an amazing time over there. We decided we were sort of ready to move back, but not quite as far as New Zealand. So we moved back to Melbourne at the end of 2010. And on the way, we travelled, went to loads of places on the way, and stopped off in Malaysia. And he proposed to me in Malaysia, so we got engaged over there, and then got married on the 17th of March 2012. So we had a very adventurous life, and I had a very adventurous life up until that point. And then we were planning to move from Melbourne to Sydney, and then it was the 2nd of August 2013 was the day that my life sort of came crashing down around me. So we were due to move the following day. This was a Friday, and I was packing up my my boxes at work. And Andy rang me and he said, I need you to come home. And he said, nothing to worry about, but I need you to come. And I thought, what is going on? And Andy was not a dramatic person, so I knew it was something big. And I remember sitting on the train thinking, but he said, don't worry about it, there's nothing wrong. Anyway, so we got back to the hotel, we checked out of our flat, and he sat me down, and he had been to the doctor that day, and he had few issues in the years gone by, but the doctor had ordered a CT scan, and that CT scan showed that he had stage 4 bowel cancer. So he was 35, I was 32. I was 7 months pregnant with my first baby, Vienna. And so, I mean, as you can imagine, trying to get your head around what that means is it's quite an extraordinary moment. And I said to him, we had our leaving party that night. We had to go and check out of our flat with the landlord. And I just said, we can't do any of that. And he said, I just need to feel normal for one more day. And we need to go. So we did all of that, went through the motions. And then we were flying to Sydney the next day. And I remember sitting on the plane. He was on the aisle seat and I was in the middle, and I had this big belly, and I was looking away from him, and I had tears streaming down my face, and I just kept on thinking, I'm 7 months pregnant and my husband's going to die. That was all I could think what was going to happen in that moment. And then I was berating myself because I felt like I should be being supportive to Andy and not crying and not feeling sad for myself, being supportive to him. Anyway, flew to Sydney. Luckily, we had private health insurance, and so within a week he had bowel surgery to remove the primary tumour in his bowel. Had a bit of a break, started chemotherapy, so had 6 rounds of chemotherapy, and chemotherapy was horrific for him. He had so many horrible side effects. I remember being in the clinic and they were gowned and had gloves, and I was thinking, but you're injecting this into my husband's body and you're protecting yourself from it on the outside. Like, it was just astounding that was the treatment. And I had to be really careful because I was pregnant. I couldn't sleep in the same bed with him and that sort of thing. Anyway, then I gave birth to Vienna. I was induced because I was overdue. It was, as many first births are, pretty horrendous. And the day I got out of hospital, Andy had to go back into chemotherapy that same day. And then, so it was just a bit of a shit show, if I'm completely honest. So Vienna was a very unsettled baby. She cried all the time. She never slept. The only time she was quiet was when she was on me. I was trying to take Andy to chemotherapy sessions, and very torn between supporting him and being there for him and looking after my daughter. I didn't prioritize myself at all during that time. So he had another he had liver surgery. So this was sort of first treatment August to the end of the year. He had liver surgery in the February to remove, there were 4 lesions in his liver. And then another 6 rounds of chemotherapy. So that 12 months was just complete survival mode, huge stress all the time. But at the end of that 12 months, he'd finished. I'm an optimist by nature. Most of the time that serves me well. I completely believed his cancer was history and gone. I mean, we celebrated with champagne. We went to Fiji for a week with Vienna. She'd finally started to sleep through the night. She was like a 6 to 8 times a night wake up baby. So yeah, we had a really lovely time there. We ended up moving back to Melbourne. That was where we wanted to be. And then the next 2 years were relatively normal. So I became pregnant with my second baby, Lola. I did my T-Master training when I was pregnant with her in Australia. And then we moved back to New Zealand. And then at the end of 2017, he was having regular scans, some troubling areas in his esophagus. And in the beginning of that was end of 2016, beginning of 2017, a biopsy showed, so they were saying at the time, it could be a new cancer, it could be existing, or it could be something else. Worst scenario was the bowel cancer returning. And so he had the biopsy, and it was the bowel cancer returning. And I remember sitting in the doctor's room, the oncologist saying to us, it is incurable. And it was one of those moments that word just stuck in my mind forevermore. And so that was hugely distressing for both of us. And because I had just thought that was a really difficult year, but we're done, and we weren't. And so then, I won't go into too much detail, but lots of, I actually found him a naturopath that specialized in cancers. He was on a regime that completely changed his diet and everything like that. His cancer didn't grow for 6 months until he had to have antibiotics, and all started to grow again. But so then 2018, he had to have chemotherapy again. 2019 was when he started to really feel the effects of his cancer. So in the past, the hardest time physically were all as a result of the treatment, not the actual cancer. But the cancer was starting to really wear on his body. Particularly his voice started to go a bit funny. And so he started radiation. He had 15 rounds of radiation, I think, in 2019. At the same time as that, his mum died of a brain tumor in July 2019. My dad also died of cancer in August 2019, and it was actually his 5-year anniversary of his death yesterday. So we were dealing with all of that, 2 little kids, running a business. He was working still. And he had, at the end of 2019, he tried this specific cancer treatment called cetuximab. One of the side effects was a full body rash. So he had this horrific rash all over his body. He had what I call black depression. The side effects were awful. And the life extension was only 6 months, best case scenario. So we stopped that pretty rapidly. He started to have trouble eating and swallowing because of the tumor in his esophagus. And we sort of fell through the gaps in the health system for a while. It was really scary. And one day he couldn't drink any water, and no one was really helping us. It was really scary. And we did end up getting help for that. Thankfully, he got a stent inserted it was probably 3 weeks before March 2020. So March 2020 rolled around, and that was when we had COVID hit. We had the first massive lockdown. So lockdown for me, I know it was a different experience for everybody, but it was exceptionally hard for me. So Andy was getting very sick at that point. He was still working, so he was only really working and sleeping. I was running my business. I was lucky enough to still be able to service orders back in level 1 lockdown because I was a food business. So I was busier than normal with my business. I had a 5-year-old that I had to homeschool, and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old who was at daycare who needed to be entertained all the time. So it was every moment of the day was full and full on. And I remember going, getting out of the house and going for a walk one day, and I could see these people coming towards me. And that was a day you didn't know how easy you could catch COVID. And they crossed the road to avoid me. And it made me cry. And I remember thinking, God, I must be kind of feeling pretty fragile at this moment, because I completely understand why they did what they did. But yeah, so that was really difficult. And so 2020, his health continued to deteriorate. The reality that neither of us wanted to admit was that this is not going well in terms of his future. Another lockdown happened, I think it was August that year, and we were sleeping in separate rooms because he was up all night. And I remember going up to his room here at home, and he was sitting on the side of the bed, and he had no top on, and he was bent over, and he was so thin at that point, and he was crying because he was in so much pain because of the tumours. And I just said to him, I talked about the hospice before, and he didn't want to entertain it. And I knew why, because you know what the hospice means. And I said, I think it's time for us to give them a call. And he said, yes. And we did. And they came, the Dr. Diane Stanley, who is an absolute angel, came to our house, and she sat with him. And she was just incredible. So they worked through a lot of his pain management. And at the same time, we knew he had to stop working. I was trying to get, there's so much admin and paperwork with something like this. I was trying to get his Australian super over here, massive rigmarole. But anyway, we had to get a prognosis from his oncologist. So that was on a piece of paper, and it said 6 to 9 months. And I just remember thinking, this can't, he is wrong. He's not going to die in this time. This can't be real. And he didn't see what was on the paper. But anyway, so it really was from that point that we had to, it was sort of 7 years by that point that we were so used to cancer, but we were used to him surviving it, used to living a life of cancer. And we had to change that to getting our heads around the fact that he was going to die from it, which was a monumental shift for us. And so I remember saying to Andy at the time, until the day you die, you are still living. So let's live every day as well as we can. We had 2 beautiful girls, Vienna and Lola. So we did as much as we could with them in the time that he had left. Then after another lockdown in March 2021, he was started to go downhill at the end of that, went rapidly downhill, and I called the hospice, and he was admitted to hospice. And so my mum came up. I took Andy to the hospice, and the doctor said to me, I knew she was looking at me strangely, and I had to go and pick up the kids from school. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I'm really worried he's going to die tonight. And I just couldn't believe what she was saying. She said, sometimes when people are holding on, they come into our care and they can die quite rapidly. And anyway, and I was completely selfish in that moment. She left the room, and I said to Andy, you cannot die tonight. I said, I'm not ready for you to die. You have to start eating and drinking, and you have to hold on, because I'm not ready. And I left the hospice. I called Mum, and I said, you have to come up. I went to pick up the girls from, Lola was at my neighbour's and Vienna was at school, and I had to sit them down on the couch and tell them that Dad might die tonight. And then I took them back in. And so anyway, he was at the hospice for about 2 weeks, and I stayed for so I stayed for every night except for 2. And I was back and forth every day in between the hospice and home. I was servicing orders, seeing the kids, coming back, getting the kids, taking them to see Andy, bringing them home, going back and staying with them. And then we both wanted him to be at home, and we were able to bring him home, and the doctors were amazing. And so he actually came home on our anniversary, the 17th of March. And he had what's called a subcut drip for all of his pain relief. So I was managing all of that, all of his morphine, charting everything, all the other drugs. And when I was with my dad when he died, and in the lead up to his death, and Dad was 68, and he had a very, what I would call a quiet journey to his death. And I've always been grateful for the time I had with Dad, because it absolutely helped prepare me for supporting Andy. But Andy's journey to his death was not quiet. It was brutal. And because he was only 42, there were a myriad of physical things that were going on, but also the biggest thing probably was psychologically. So he was hallucinating, he was getting really anxious and scared. I spent so much time sort of massaging him, doing meditations for him and trying to keep him calm. And a woman came to help me wash him one day, and I could see his face. And he said to me later on, "I thought you were going to kill me." And he believed that that was his reality. So it was a very difficult, intense, particularly the last week before he died. And he was so skinny. He was a slim person anyway. And I remember one day I was helping change him, and he had sores on his back because of he had to sit up most of the time, not lie down. And my sister and I helped stand him up, and he collapsed onto her because he couldn't even hold his own weight. And I realized his sores were bleeding, and I just thought I felt so responsible that I hadn't noticed that they were bleeding. And so there were so many things like that. But Andy was he was quite a vain person. He was successful in his work, and I felt such a sense of duty to him as his wife to preserve his dignity in that time, to make sure he always knew he was never alone. I slept in the lounge with him, and it was very humbling to be completely of service to somebody in the most important time of their life, really, I think it is. And I remember I spoke to the GP on the phone on Sunday, the 4th of April, saying to him, "I just can't bear this going on any longer. I know Andy is going to die from this. I want him to die now because the suffering is just inhumane." And his suffering, but also my suffering as well, witnessing him go through that. And then in the early hours of Monday, the 5th of April, I woke up and I looked at my phone. It was 1:44 a.m. And I knew, and he was right beside me on the hospital bed. And I put my hand on him, and his body was still warm, and he still felt like he was alive. And I was trying to find his heartbeat, but I couldn't find it. And I remember thinking in that moment, I know I said to the doctor, I want him to die, but I didn't want him. I still would have taken a morphine, cancer-riddled Andy over nobody. And I was trying to find his heartbeat, but I couldn't find it. And so I knew he had died. And I just lay the hospital bed down, and I just sat there for a little moment. And my sister and my mum were there, so I got my sister and my mum up, and I got him changed. And I'd asked all of his friends to send in candles in the sort of week or two before. And it was beautiful and quiet. And we lit all the candles and put them all around him. And then Lola woke up, and I had to tell her, and Vienna, I woke Vienna up. But we were lucky that we had those beautiful, precious hours of the morning from sort of 2 a.m. until, sort of 7, 8 a.m., where I could just be with him. We could just be with him and be with our grief. And it was actually such a beautiful time that we had there. And then really from sort of, when business hours started, obviously I had to make the awful phone calls you never want to make to his brother. Both his parents were dead, and his good friends. But then that week was so busy for me. So organising a funeral, it's an event, sort of organise that in a week. So it was really busy for me. I spoke at his funeral, so I had to take time to write the speech. And I had a wonderful funeral director, and she said there is absolutely no rush. You don't need to plan. You don't need to book the funeral soon. So we had it a week after he died, on the Monday. And I remember I had to have some time to myself on the Sunday night. I went to yoga, and I was in Sphinx pose. You might know that, Tara. And I remember looking at my finger, at my wedding rings, and thinking, oh my God, I'm not married anymore. And that was the first time I'd ever had that thought. I was a widow. I wasn't a wife anymore. And anyway, it was just an odd moment for me that I hadn't even thought about that. Andy had been dead for a week. I hadn't thought about the fact that I wasn't married, legally married anyway, anymore. So we had the funeral on the Monday. We had it at Ellerslie. Andy worked in the racing industry. He was racing mad. We had it at Ellerslie Racecourse, which was very fitting. And you know, it was just the strangest day for me. But you sort of go through the motions. You're also a host as well as a grieving wife, so you're sort of playing two roles at that time. And Lola, so day after the funeral was Lola's 5th birthday. So Vienna was only 7 and Lola was only 4 when he died. And I actually sent her to daycare that day, as awful as that sounds, but she wanted to go. And I knew I needed everyone away from me. I just needed that day at home by myself. And that was the day that I grieved the most out of any day. And I've only ever probably had the biggest moments of grief when I'm on my own. And then there's no buffer zone. So I went straight into solo parenting. You know, I was running my business. That was still going all the time. I had a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old by that point. Life was massively busy. I remember in the lead up to Andy dying, I had this moment thinking, I haven't even thought about what life will be like afterwards. I just didn't have capacity for that. So I had to learn how to be a solo parent, run a business and all those sorts of things. And then 4 months after he died, we went into that final massive lockdown that we had in Auckland. And I had such a big reaction when that was announced. And I thought didn't really even feel like I coped last time. How am I going to do this all on my own? Anyway, I had that moment and I thought, okay, the number one most important thing in this time is family harmony. Is me and Vienna and Lola and us together as a family. That is my number one. And then the number two thing I thought, I'm a highly achievement focused person. I'm a 3 and a 1 on Enneagram, which is achievement focused and perfectionist. That's not a good recipe with being a solo mother and in lockdown. And so I made it my goal every single day from a work perspective was to do the least amount of work possible. And it sounds so ridiculous, but it completely worked because I felt good every single day because I did the least amount of work possible. Anyway, and during that time, I developed a lot. I mean, I'm a problem solver by nature. I have so many life hacks that I do now. For example, I have a 28-day menu plan that I have all the ingredients. I do my shopping all online, same day every week. A million different life hacks to make me not go completely insane by solo parenting. And then I'll just quickly finish up by saying that, so that was end of 2021. By the end of 2022, I was feeling absolutely exhausted. So I hadn't really had a break at all through all of this time. And I remember walking up the stairs here, I'm in my office now, which is upstairs, walking up the stairs, and I just lay on the stairs and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. It was just utterly relentless. And I had a coaching call with Joelle from Company of Women, and I was telling her how exhausted I was. And I said, it's not like I can just shut my business down. And she said, why can't you do that? And she really challenged me on that. And I said, well, of course I can't. You know, I have a duty to my customers and many other reasons why. But she pushed me on it. And then after the call, I just sort of let that sit for a couple of days. And then I remember feeling this huge sense of relief at the prospect of taking some time out. So in when was it, end of February to the end of April 2023, I closed my business down for 2 months. Now, I've never talked about my personal situation through my business channels before. My customers had no clue about what was going on in my personal life all that time. I'm an introvert by nature. I don't like sharing a lot about myself publicly. And I had been interviewed by Good magazine about my personal situation, how it linked to my business and my sort of well-being philosophies. That was coming out at the end of January. I then wrote a blog to sort of support that. And so that was my sort of coming out, I suppose, and telling my audience about what had been going on in my personal life. And then a couple of weeks later, I announced my closure. And the feedback from everybody was just so nurturing and supportive. It was very overwhelming. And, you know, people were feeding back to me that here is someone that doesn't just talk about health and well-being being a priority. Here it is, it in action. I'm prioritizing my health and my business. So I did that for 2 months at the beginning of 2013, and I felt that I still remember the day I sat down at my desk when I opened on the 28th of April 2023. I just felt so gleeful to be back at work and working again. I knew that it was the right thing to do. My orders just bounced right back up. So it was a scary thing to do at the time, but one that was well worth it. So Tara, I thought I'd just leave it there if that works for you.
Absolutely, my friend. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You know, we felt your heartbreak through that really, really tough season that, you know, most of us will experience at some point with somebody that we love dearly. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing so openly. Yeah, what soul hugs is what I want to say. Um, so what I would love to know a little bit more about is how you have created life um, beyond Andy, really, you know, family life, work life. What is it that is the new way that you are taking this forward?
I think so. I feel like the one philosophy that has held true for me this entire time, and it was something that I knew before Andy died, but it came more to the fore after he died, was that my number one priority is my own health and well-being. And I actually have a list just up here of my priorities on my office wall of my priorities, and my health and well-being is number one. Vienna and Lola are number two. My business is number three. And I think having that written down has been, and somewhere visible that I am every day, has been such an important guidepost to me to understand this is a long-term game for me. And I think even when you become a mother, your duties double sort of overnight. And then you put work into the mix too, and it feels impossible a lot of the time. And then being a solo mother on top of all of that feels like it just doesn't work, you know, a lot of the time. And so I know, and I think most of us instinctively know when we are feeling physically energetic and mentally calm. I'm a much better mother. I'm way more efficient with my business. I'm a better friend. I'm better at everything. So I have to put that first. And so that's been my principle the whole time, and it has served me so well. And it's helped me undo a lot of my programming, so my default programming over time, to be able to prioritize things in a different way and really look after myself, to make sure I am the best mother I possibly can be, and the best business I can be in the stage and season of my life.
Yeah, and I so appreciate, Anna, the it feels like that is a hugely courageous um place to be, because we are so deeply socialized to forget ourselves, women. Men have their own journey, so if you don't mind, guys, I'm focusing on the sort of feminine experience, and it can take a long time. It definitely did for me to land with that real clarity that life goes well as a function of how well I ensure I am, instead of my job is to take care of and expend myself for everyone else. And as women, yeah, a lot of us come very, very slowly to that truth. Even in our business, it will be better when we understand how to take care of and create really strong boundaries around our time. So I just wanted to really amplify that. Um, I think it's such a powerful statement. I almost want to leave the story there and maybe bring us to your tips. So this is one huge experience in your life, journey in your life, where, you know, it really can take us down. And this series is all about how do we rise in our strength and in our power again, and what you know really worked for you. So can you share with us now, Anna, your tips to inspire the rest of us so that we can add that into the mix for ourselves?
I didn't actually prep for this, but yes, I can do that. I think everybody on this call should have written down somewhere that they can see that their health and well-being is their number one priority. I think having it written invisible is exceptionally powerful. And then the next step after that is just to give yourself permission to do that. So instead of answering the emails, go for a walk around the block. Instead of tidying your kids' room, go to yoga. Those sorts of things. It's a journey and it takes some time. But I think crucially, the most important thing is to give yourself permission to do that. So that's my number one tip, is to make your health your number one priority. The other thing I think that's been really helpful for me is to understand what creates happiness. And I think all of us are here living this life really with the ultimate goal of being happy. And you probably know, Tara, of the Harvard, that long study that they've done over 80 years measuring what makes people happy. And it all comes down to relationships, and particularly with your partner. Um, and the people that are closest to you in your life. And so I read a lot about that, about happiness. I know what makes me happy as a person, and I orientate my life around that. And an example of that for me is that, so I typically work school hours. I do bits and pieces outside of that. But so those work hours are really precious to me. But I also spend time in some of my work hours. So I started on the dating scene last year, and I've met a lovely man called Tim, and we often will meet each other during work hours. And the reason I sacrifice my work hours for him and our relationship is that I know it brings me so much happiness. And when I get to the end of my life, one of my goals now is to have an amazing relationship. And I know I need to invest in that. And if I slog it out, I could work 7 days a week on my business easily. But I know when I think about myself over the long term, that's actually not going to bring me the happiness that I want for my life. So I think it really is about understanding what creates happiness. Often it's the most important people in our life. I think and I certainly did this for most of my career, prioritized work way too much over myself and my relationships. I think that needs to flip. So I feel like that's just a bit of a mindset shift again for everybody to get used to, is that maybe I'll put just 20% less effort into work and put that into my relationships and my health and well-being. And I feel quite certain that if you do that, the result will be really beautiful for you. And another thing I've learned, I had so many moments over the last decade where I just thought I couldn't do it anymore. And it was so hard. And there were so many things coming at me from different angles. And I just wanted to scream at the universe to stop it. I'd learned the lessons. I just needed an easier life. And that didn't happen. But I learned to step back from my situation and observe it from a distance. And I knew what I was going through was tough. I'm a curious person by nature. And I think having that ability to step back from whatever challenge that is going on in your life, and think about what's your reaction to it. And whatever reaction you have makes complete sense. But also knowing the hardest times in your life are the ones that teach you the most about yourself. And they teach you about life, and they teach you about other people and relationships. So every time something difficult comes up for me now, I think this is good. That feeling of discomfort and you want it to go away, I almost embrace that feeling now, because I know it's an opportunity for growth for me and an opportunity for learning. And I know with 100% certainty I am a much more whole and strong human because of the exceptional challenges that I've been through. I would not be who I am today had I not gone through them. And so by nature, we want to shoo away difficulty and wish that it wasn't there, and get frustrated by it and think this shouldn't be happening. But I think, again, the mindset shift of actually this could be a pot of gold for me in some way, whilst acknowledging how difficult it is. And the other thing, a couple of things more at a sort of granular level. Anyone who is a mother knows you have 1,000 duties every day. If you're achievement orientated like me, that's quite difficult. You like to tick through the list. I think about my to-do list not as a linear list, but as a circle, because a circle is infinite and parental duties are infinite. And for me, just thinking about my to-do list as a circle completely took the pressure off me. You can never finish it, and which is completely reflective of life. So that's just a little trick if that helps anybody. What other thing was I going to say? Oh, actually, another thing that I do from a practical level that helps me a lot is that for my work days, the afternoon or the evening before the next day, I will schedule. I will write down, it's hard to see there. I do different focus blocks. I will schedule and plan in advance. I plan a tea break pretty much at 10:30 every morning. So I plan in my rest times, which helps gives me permission. I do things like I'll choose my outfit the night before and all of those sorts of things. So I think scheduling in advance, scheduling your downtime and that nurturing time really helps for me as well. And I think, linking it back to my business, I really feel like tea is a vehicle for well-being. And the act for me of giving myself permission every morning to step away from my laptop and my phone. I often will go outside if the weather's good with a cup of tea and nothing else, and just have that much needed brain and body break. It's hugely important to me. And I think, again, it's about prioritizing those rituals and giving yourself permission to do something on a very regular basis that nurtures your mind and body, and not leaving it to the end of the day and not thinking it's a luxury and not thinking that you're selfish for doing it. Know that each time you do something like that, you're investing in your well-being.
Wow, that is quite the list, Anna.
I have about 100 more as well, but I'll leave it there.
I'm sure you do, and I actually there's probably people lining up for the book or the journal that you're going to write that people can order. I just want to really amplify a couple of things from what you've shared there, because I suppose as a person who has had the privilege of working with thousands of women, and my own experience too, there are two things that I think we do. One of them is to put our partner somewhere down the list. I was literally talking about this with another member this morning on a session, how children come first, she said, then comes work, then comes her partner and friends. And she says, I'm somewhere after that. But it was interesting that certainly most women will recognize that we are certainly not putting ourselves first, which is a really key message from you today. But also our partner goes after our kids. And when you think about it, it's counterintuitive to building a great family, isn't it?
Yes.
And so that, you're a great family when you have a great partnership. And I did a program a few years ago, and a part of that program was that we had to think about our love relationship with our partner every single day, what we would do to nurture it. So it became this experience of choosing micro things to do. And I remember at the beginning thinking, we're fine. I'm fine. Like, I don't even why are we even doing this? But because we had to do it, and we had to put our journal entries into the community, this kind of closed community of other leaders that were doing it, over time, I thought, this is actually making a real difference in my life. Just intentionally every day choosing one micro way to honor that relationship. And then the other thing that you so beautifully communicated, you will know that is wrapped up in the great phrase by Nassim Taleb, anti-fragile. That is that things gain from chaos and disorder. They actually are better as a consequence of it, and your life experience has brought you to that realization. But it's called anti-fragile. We are the literal opposite. In fact, Nassim Taleb says it's the opposite of robust, which for many of us, when we think about resilience, you have fragile down one end, and we kind of thought that robust is up the other end. But in looking at what robust is, it's this idea that I can get knocked down, but I can get back up again, and that it shouldn't have happened to me, but if it happens to happen again, I'll be okay. Actually, it is this open arms embrace of that surprising event that we wouldn't have actually dialed up for ourselves. But on the other side of it, when we look back, recognize that there is a big difference between who I was before and who I am after it. And actually who I am after it is the person I choose. And so the idea is that we do gain. And so we don't want to live in a world where we are hoping for everything to go my way. Actually, we hope, all we need to hope is that we just keep leaning in the knowledge that whatever the universe presents, I know I've got this. So you couldn't have scripted it that bit better from my perspective, because it is such an important message in life, and to teach each other and to amplify with children that getting knocked down is ultimately great for us, because that is how we learn to rise. Okay, that feels like a kind of a perfect moment to pause our recording and to say thank you to you, Anna. You are wise. I wish I was as wise as you are now when I was your age. I'm a little bit older, but I really recognize that you have brought a quality of wisdom to your life experience. It's such a gift to the people around you. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you and to walk alongside you for just some parts of your journey, but also to benefit from what you bring to our community. So I'm delighted that this recording is one of the gifts that keeps on giving. If those of you that are part of our community at the moment haven't already done, there is more stuff from Anna on the shelf, in that digital resource pool that we have. Many years ago, she and I sat down and she shared her story then. And so there'll be a bunch of things that are in that if you'd like to get to know this beautiful woman more. Anna, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you again today.